The silence of North Vale wilderness hung like an interrupted prayer. On that winter morning, snowflakes fell in slow motion, covering the world with a white blanket that crackled under the weight of anything living. And there, tied to a solitary pine tree, a dark-coated horse trembled. His name was Ironhowl, though no one was around to call him that anymore. The wind barely moved, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Ironhowl lowered his head, his tangled mane partially covering eyes that were once vibrant, but now appeared as dull as river stones without sunlight. His ribs projected beneath his skin, forming shadows that told stories of hunger and neglect. Around him, between the trunks of snow-covered trees, shadows moved. Predators, patient, waiting. A low growl echoed in the distance. Ironhowl raised his ears, a final reflex of survival in a body that seemed to have given up. The rope that bound him to the tree was loose enough for him to move a few steps, but there was nowhere to go, no way to escape. He had been left behind, not just by people, but by time, by mercy, by everything except life itself, which still clung stubbornly to his chest. But fate wasn't done with Ironhowl yet. Rowan knew the weight of silence better than any man. He had lived alone for so long that he sometimes wondered if his own voice still worked. His cabin, hidden among ancient pines, was small but sturdy, just as he himself had become. Built of stacked logs and covered with a reinforced thatch roof, it was his refuge against a world he had chosen to abandon many years ago. That night, as the fire crackled in the stone fireplace, Rowan felt something strange in the air, a restlessness he couldn't name. His mule, Clara, was agitated in the small stable attached to the cabin. It was then he realized the silence of the forest had changed. It wasn't the natural silence of falling snow, it was something more, a tense silence of waiting. Rowan added more wood to the fire and grabbed his old oil lantern. He put on the heavy coat made of elk skin, a gift from his father many years before. His eyes, a deep green that contrasted with his grizzled, unkempt beard, scanned the cabin. In one corner, dried herbs hung from the ceiling in small bundles. In another, simple tools rested organized on rustic shelves. With determined steps, he went out into the night. The snow reached his knees in some places, but he knew every inch of that land. He had learned to listen, not with his ears, but with something deeper, a sense that many forgot they possessed. The lantern light created dancing shadows between the trees. Rowan followed a path he didn't even know he was treading, guided only by intuition and the whisper of the wind through the branches. That's when he saw it, a dark shape against the snow, a horse, motionless. Still alive? He murmured to himself, approaching cautiously. The horse slightly raised its head at the sound of footsteps in the snow. Its eyes, though exhausted, fixed on Rowan with a spark of awareness that surprised the man. It wasn't just fear he saw there. It was something more, a faint will to continue. Rowan knelt in the snow beside the animal, feeling the cold penetrate his worn pants. The rope that bound the horse was new, a contrast to the deplorable state of the animal. Someone had tied that horse there and departed, leaving it to whatever came first, hunger, cold, or predators. "Who would do this to you?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to the animal. With a precise movement, he drew the hunting knife from his belt and cut the rope. "You're not done yet," he whispered, placing a trembling hand on the horse's neck. "I can see it, you're still here." The journey back to the cabin was slow and arduous. Using fallen branches and ropes from his backpack, Rowan improvised a rudimentary sled. With Clara's help, his faithful mule, he managed to place the horse on the improvised boards and begin the difficult journey back. Each step was an effort. The horse weighed heavily, even in its debilitated state, and the snow made the path treacherous. Rowan's breath formed dense clouds in the icy air, and his muscles protested against the effort. But something drove him forward, perhaps the same stubbornness that had kept him alive all those years in the solitude of the forest. "Just a little more," he would occasionally mutter, as much to the horse as to himself. When they finally reached the clearing where his cabin stood, it was almost dawn. The sky was beginning to brighten timidly to the east, a sign that night would soon give way to day. Rowan knew he needed to act quickly. With even greater effort, he dragged the sled to Clara's stable, which would have to share the cramped space. The stable was simple, a dirt floor covered with a thick layer of straw, wooden walls with small cracks through which air passed, and a low roof that retained the animal's heat. Clara watched with curiosity as Rowan worked to accommodate the newcomer. Carefully, he spread more fresh straw in a corner and, using all his strength, helped the horse lie down. The animal obeyed with a docility that only extreme exhaustion could provide. "There, now let's take care of you," said Rowan, cautiously running his hand along the animal's flank. He quickly returned to the cabin and came back with a bucket of warm water, clean cloths, and a small leather pouch. Kneeling beside the horse, he began to carefully clean its body, removing mud, twigs, and dry leaves that had stuck to its coat. "You must have a name," he murmured as he worked. "Something strong, I bet. I can see it in your eyes." As he cleaned, Rowan began to notice details. Old scars on the hind legs, a mark on the left flank partially covered by overgrown hair, and a small design that seemed to have been burned into the skin, a circle with curved lines resembling a stylized howl. "Iron Howl," he said suddenly, the syllables escaping his lips as if he already knew them from somewhere. "That's what I'll call you. Iron Howl." The horse moved its ears slightly at the sound of the name, as if recognizing it. From the leather pouch, Rowan took out dried herbs he cultivated near the cabin: echinacea to strengthen the system, calendula to heal wounds, and chamomile to calm. He mixed them with warm water and a little wild honey he had collected in the fall, creating a thick, aromatic mixture. "This will help," he said softly, offering the mixture in a small wooden bowl. At first, Iron Howl hesitated, but the sweet smell of honey eventually attracted him. With his dry tongue, he tasted the mixture. Rowan smiled when the horse began to drink, slowly at first, then with increasing acceptance. "Welcome, Iron Howl," said Rowan, sitting in the straw next to the exhausted animal. "We're far from finished, you and I." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The harsh winter of North Vale slowly began to show signs of giving way to spring. Small green shoots emerged timidly between the melting snow, and the sun remained in the sky for increasingly longer periods. In Rowan's cabin, a routine had been established. Every morning he woke before sunrise and prepared a special porridge for Iron Howl: oats, seeds, and strengthening herbs, all mixed with warm water. Then he spent hours brushing the horse's coat, which gradually regained its shine, dark as obsidian. The first weeks were the most difficult. Iron Howl could barely stand. His legs trembled with the effort, and his eyes still maintained that distant opacity. Rowan fed him in small portions several times a day, knowing that a weakened stomach couldn't handle much food at once. "Slow," he frequently said, as he held the bowl for the horse. "One step at a time." With infinite patience, Rowan treated the animal's wounds. Some were superficial, cuts and scratches probably made during some desperate escape. Others were deeper and older, scars that told stories of years of hard work or perhaps even mistreatment. "Who hurt you like this?" he would sometimes ask, while applying ointments made from herbs he himself collected and prepared. The answer, of course, never came in words, but as the days passed, Rowan began to notice subtle changes in Iron Howl's behavior. The horse began to turn his head toward the door whenever he heard Rowan's footsteps approaching. His ears moved with more vivacity, following the sounds of the forest around the cabin. On a particularly sunny morning, when winter was already showing clear signs of retreat, Rowan led Iron Howl outside the stable for the first time since his rescue. The horse hesitated at the entrance, blinking against the bright sunlight reflecting off the remaining snow. "Come on," encouraged Rowan. "It's time to feel the sun again." With uncertain steps, Iron Howl went out into the small clearing in front of the cabin. His hooves sank slightly into the soft snow, but he seemed stronger now, able to maintain his balance without difficulty. Rowan watched with a discreet smile as the horse raised his muzzle, inhaling the fresh morning air as if rediscovering the world. During that outdoor session, something extraordinary happened. Iron Howl, after taking a few steps around the clearing, turned and deliberately walked back to where Rowan was standing. Without warning, the horse brought his muzzle to the man's shoulder and rested it there for a brief moment. Rowan froze, surprised by the gesture. It was the first time Iron Howl had initiated contact, a small touch, but profound. A silent pact sealed not by words, but by shared survival. "You're coming back," whispered Rowan, slowly raising his hand to touch the horse's neck. "You're finding your way back." That moment marked a turning point. In the days that followed, Iron Howl began to show more signs of recovery, not just physical, but also in spirit. His eyes gained a vibrant shine, and in his movements, there was a new determination. He began to neigh at dawn, as if greeting the day, a sound that echoed through the forest and brought an involuntary smile to Rowan's lips. "Never thought I'd miss noise," he commented one day, as he led Iron Howl along a small path between the trees near the cabin. Spring was definitely coming to North Vale. Snow areas became increasingly rare, replaced by carpets of new grass and wildflowers. Iron Howl began to graze in the nearby fields, pulling up tender grass with renewed appetite. Rowan watched from a distance, giving the horse the freedom to explore within safe limits. It was during one of those days of exploration that Rowan noticed something different. Footprints in the soft mud near the stream that ran behind his cabin. Human footprints. Recent. A shadow of concern crossed his face as he knelt to better examine the marks. Who else would be in the forest? In all the years he had lived there, he rarely encountered other people. And when he did, they were usually passing hunters or honey collectors in search of wild hives. But something about those footprints troubled him. They were deep, made by heavy boots, and they followed a pattern that suggested reconnaissance, not random exploration. "Iron Howl," he called, his voice louder than normal. The horse raised his head from the grass and looked toward Rowan, ears alert. "Let's go home," he said, making a gesture with his arm. To his surprise and satisfaction, Iron Howl obeyed immediately, trotting toward him with a confidence that weeks before would have been unthinkable. Together, they returned to the cabin, as Rowan cast vigilant glances at the surrounding forest. The footprints had awakened something in him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years, not just for himself, but for Iron Howl. "We need to stay alert, friend," he murmured, running his hand along the horse's shining flank as they entered the stable. "I think we're no longer alone in this part of the forest." Rowan's concern was not unfounded. 3 days after finding the footprints, he was on the cabin roof, replacing some straw damaged by winter snow, when he spotted movement among the trees. Instinctively, he crouched down, becoming almost invisible against the time-darkened wood. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, advancing slowly through the clearing. They wore worn leather clothes and wide-brimmed hats that shadowed their faces. Each carried a rifle resting on the saddle, and the horses they rode appeared well-treated and strong, horses of men who depended on them to survive. Rowan remained motionless, observing. The men stopped about 20 yards from the cabin, examining the structure and surroundings with evident interest. "There's smoke coming from the chimney," said one, the tallest of the group. "Someone's living here." "We're far from the marked lands," commented another in a faded red hat. "Whoever it is, they're in no man's land." The third man, who until then had been silent, suddenly pointed to the side of the cabin where the stable had a small open door. Iron Howl had just come out for his morning walk and was grazing peacefully a few yards away. "There he is," said the man, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "I knew that horse was around here." Rowan felt his heart race. Were they looking for Iron Howl? Were these the men who had abandoned him in the forest to die? Or perhaps they were looking for a lost horse. Either way, something in that man's tone made it clear that their intentions were not good. With careful movements, Rowan descended from the roof on the opposite side of the cabin, using the protrusions between the logs as support. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he ran silently inside, grabbed his old rifle, and came back out, strategically positioning himself beside the front door. "Hello!" he called with a firm voice. The 3 riders turned abruptly toward the voice, hands instinctively moving to their weapons. Seeing Rowan with his rifle casually pointed at the ground, not a direct threat but a clear reminder that he was armed, they relaxed slightly, but tension remained in the air. "Good morning," replied the tallest man, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We didn't know this cabin was occupied, we're just passing through." "And admiring my horse," added Rowan, his tone calm but firm. The man in the red hat exchanged a quick glance with the third rider before responding, "That's a fine animal. We don't see many horses of this quality in the forest." "He is special," agreed Rowan, moving slowly to position himself between the men and Iron Howl, who continued grazing, apparently oblivious to the tension. "What brings you to this part of the forest?" "We're far from any common trail." The third man, with a grizzled beard and a visible scar crossing his chin, finally spoke. "We're looking for a lost horse, a black stallion that disappeared from our lands a few months ago." "Interesting," replied Rowan, his gaze unwavering. "And you're looking for a horse that disappeared months ago just now, when the snow has melted and spring has arrived?" The 3 men looked at each other, uncomfortable with the astute observation. "We had other leads before," defended the one in the red hat. "We followed tracks." Rowan nodded slowly, pretending to consider the explanation. "Well, this horse was tied to a tree in the middle of winter, starving and freezing when I found him," he finally said, his voice gaining a hardness that surprised even himself. "He was left to die, for the bears, the wolves, or whatever came first." The scarred man looked away, but the tallest kept his eyes fixed on Rowan. "That horse has an owner," he stated coldly, "and it's not you." Rowan took a step forward, his body tense like a bowstring. "This horse was thrown away by those who saw no value in him," he replied in a low, intense voice. "And now you want him back? He has someone now, someone who stayed." The riders backed off a bit, clearly surprised by Rowan's firmness. "We'll be back to talk about this," promised the tall man, as he gestured for the other two to turn around. "Don't bother," replied Rowan. "This conversation is over." As the three men moved away through the forest, Rowan remained standing, watching until they disappeared among the trees. Only then did he allow his shoulders to relax. He looked at Ironhowl, who was now watching him with those intelligent eyes. "They'll be back," he said to the horse, approaching to caress his neck, "and we need to be ready when that happens." That afternoon, Rowan began making preparations. He reinforced the doors of the cabin and stable. He cut pieces of wood and sharpened them at one end, creating stakes that could be used as a barrier. He checked his supply of ammunition for the rifle. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. More importantly, he spent more time with Ironhowl, walking together around the perimeter of the clearing, familiarizing the horse with every aspect of the terrain. He talked constantly to him, his voice low and confident. "I trust you, Ironhowl," he would say as he guided him through a narrow path between dense trees, "and I need you to trust me." The horse responded in his own way, following Rowan with an almost supernatural attention, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. His movements became more coordinated, his reflexes sharper. The transformation of the fragile animal Rowan had found in the snow to this majestic specimen was almost complete. At night, when the sounds of the forest changed, becoming more mysterious and deep, Rowan would sit at the cabin door, rifle in hand, looking at the stars that dotted the sky between the treetops. Ironhowl remained nearby, grazing peacefully or simply standing, like a silent sentinel. "I never imagined I wouldn't be alone anymore," commented Rowan, more to himself than to the horse. "Yeah, it's strange how things change." The moon emerged between the clouds, illuminating the clearing with a silvery light that transformed Ironhowl's coat into something almost supernatural. The horse raised his head, his nostrils dilating as he captured the night scents. Rowan observed the animal with a mixture of admiration and concern. Whatever the future might bring, he knew he did not want to, return to the solitary life he had led for so many years. Ironhowl had changed something fundamental inside him, rekindled a flame he thought extinct. "We'll overcome this," he promised in a low voice. "Together." A week passed without signs of the three men, but Rowan didn't lower his guard. Each morning brought new preparations. Each evening, a careful check of the cabin surroundings. Ironhowl seemed to sense the tension in the air, staying more alert and reactive to forest sounds. It was during a particularly warm afternoon, when the green of spring was exploding in all directions, that Rowan heard the sound. Horse hooves, many of them, approaching rapidly along the eastern trail. "They're back," he murmured to Ironhowl, who was grazing near the cabin. "And they've brought reinforcements." There was no time for hesitation. Rowan ran into the cabin, emerging seconds later with his rifle and a leather bag containing ammunition. With quick gestures, he guided Ironhowl behind the structure, where a small rock formation provided some natural cover. "Stay here," he ordered firmly, looking directly into the horse's eyes. Surprisingly, Ironhowl obeyed, backing a few steps behind the rocks, his posture tense but controlled. Rowan then ran to the position he had prepared days before, a rudimentary platform built between two tall pine trees, offering a clear view of the clearing in front of the cabin without fully exposing him. He didn't have to wait long. 6 riders emerged from the forest, advancing in a deliberately intimidating formation. He recognized the 3 men from the previous encounter, now accompanied by 3 more, all armed, all with determined expressions. The tall man, clearly the leader, raised his hand to stop the group about 50 feet from the cabin. "We know you're there, forest man," he shouted, his voice carrying an arrogance that made Rowan's blood boil. Hand over the horse, and no one gets hurt." Rowan remained silent, observing. He noticed how the men were positioned, two of them slightly apart, ready to flank the cabin. He saw the lassos hanging from the saddles, prepared to capture Ironhowl. This wasn't a group of men seeking to recover lost property. It was a gang prepared to take by force what they wanted. "I won't ask again," continued the leader when the silence extended. "The horse or your life? Choose." Rowan adjusted his position on the platform and finally responded, his voice calm, contrasting with the tension of the moment. "You abandoned that horse to die, left him tied up in winter, without food, without water. What kind of men would do that?" The man in the red hat spat on the ground. "That animal was too problematic for the work, wasn't worth the food he consumed. And now that he's strong again, you want him back?" asked Rowan, the indignation evident in his voice. "He's property of Northvale Mining," replied the leader impatiently. "Marked and registered. What we did with him is our business." Pieces of the puzzle fit together in Rowan's mind. The mark on Ironhowl's flank, the scars consistent with heavy work. He had been a mine horse, probably used to pull loads in narrow, dark tunnels. When his strength failed, when he could no longer meet expectations, he was discarded in the cruelest way possible. "He's not anyone's property anymore," declared Rowan, his voice acquiring an unshakable firmness. "You lost any right to him the moment you decided to leave him to die." The scarred man pulled a lasso from his saddle and twirled it in the air. "Enough talk. Let's take what we came for." What followed was chaos. Two of the men advanced quickly to the sides of the cabin, while the other four kept Rowan under surveillance. They didn't expect, however, that he would be positioned in the trees, not inside the structure. Rowan fired a warning shot that hit the ground near the rider approaching from the right. The man pulled back abruptly, almost falling from the saddle. The other riders drew their weapons, firing toward the cabin. "I'm up here!" shouted Rowan, revealing his strategic position. The momentary surprise was enough to destabilize the group. Taking advantage of the confusion, Rowan quickly descended from the platform, keeping himself covered by the trees as he moved toward the rocks where Ironhowl waited. The horse was agitated but not panicked, his ears moving rapidly as he captured the sounds of the confrontation. When he saw Rowan approaching, he neighed softly in recognition. "We need them separated," murmured Rowan, briefly caressing the animal's neck. "Trust me." With agile movements, Rowan mounted Ironhowl, the first time he had done so since finding him. For a moment he feared the horse would react badly, considering his past of mistreatment. But Ironhowl remained steady, as if that moment had been rehearsed countless times. "Let's go," he whispered, leaning forward. Ironhowl responded immediately, advancing along a narrow path between the trees that skirted the clearing. Rowan could hear the men shouting, reorganizing. He knew he had only seconds before they noticed his movement. When they reached the opposite end of the clearing, Rowan gave the signal. Ironhowl understood. The horse inflated his chest, raised his head, and released a neigh so powerful that it echoed through the trees, causing birds to take flight in alarm. The riders turned abruptly toward the sound, momentarily paralyzed by the unexpected origin. That was all Rowan needed. With a light touch on Ironhowl's flanks, they burst from the trees, charging directly toward the surprised group. It wasn't an attack, it was a diversion. Rowan didn't intend to confront 6 armed men head-on. His plan was to create chaos, to separate them, to use the forest he knew so well to his advantage. The men scattered, some firing wildly, others trying to control their frightened horses. The scarred man swung his lasso, but Ironhowl swerved at the last moment, avoiding the noose with a grace that belied his size. "To the stream!" commanded Rowan, and once again Ironhowl responded as if they were one being. They plunged into the denser part of the forest, where the branches were low and the undergrowth thick. Behind them, they could hear the frustrated shouts of the pursuers, the sound of horses crashing through vegetation not meant for riding. Rowan smiled grimly. This was his forest, his home. The men might be armed, but he had the advantage of knowledge, and Ironhowl was proving to be a partner beyond any expectation. When they reached the stream, swollen with spring melt, Rowan directed Ironhowl to follow it upstream, where the water cascaded over rocks, masking the sound of their passage. They moved this way for several minutes, before climbing the steep bank and doubling back, now headed toward a section of forest where Rowan had previously prepared a few surprises. The first rider to follow their trail found himself facing a wall of sharpened stakes hidden by foliage. His horse reared in fright, throwing the man to the ground with a heavy thud. The second crashed into a tripwire Rowan had strung between trees, sending him sprawling into a patch of mud. One by one, the pursuers fell victim to the forest itself, to the traps and the terrain, to their own impatience and anger. Not all were stopped, however. The leader and one other man, the one with the red hat, managed to navigate the obstacles and continued pursuit. They caught up near a small ravine where Rowan had briefly stopped to let Ironhowl catch his breath. The two riders burst from the trees, weapons raised. "End of the line, forest man," shouted the leader, his face contorted with rage. "Get off my property." Rowan dismounted slowly, keeping one hand on Ironhowl's neck. The horse trembled slightly beneath his touch, but not from fear, from readiness. "He's not property," replied Rowan, his voice carrying across the small space between them. "He's a living being who deserves better than you gave him." "Enough," spat the leader, raising his rifle. "Last chance." Step away from the horse. Rowan didn't move. Instead, he looked directly into Ironhowl's eyes, a silent communication passing between them. The horse flicked his ears, understanding. "You want him so badly?" asked Rowan, his hand dropping from the horse's neck. "Ask him if he wants to go with you." The leader laughed, a harsh cutting sound. "It's an animal, you fool. It does what it's told." Rowan stepped back, his hands raised slightly. "Try telling him that." For a moment, everything was still. The birds fell silent, the wind held its breath. Then, without warning, Ironhowl moved. But he didn't run away. He didn't flee. Instead, the horse reared up on his hind legs and let out a cry that shook the treetops. He charged, not in panic but with power, directly toward the men who had once abandoned him. The horses of the two riders panicked, unused to such a direct challenge. They bucked and twisted, nearly throwing their riders. The man in the red hat managed to keep his seat, but in doing so, dropped his rifle. The leader fought to control his mount while trying to aim, but the chaos was too complete. Ironhowl's charge was calculated, not reckless. He cut between the two men, separating them further, then wheeled around with a grace that seemed impossible for his size. He didn't attack the men directly. He didn't need to. His presence, his power, his obvious intelligence was enough to throw them into disarray. Rowan, meanwhile, had not been idle. Using the distraction Ironhowl provided, he retrieved his rifle and fired a shot into the air. "Leave," he commanded, his voice more powerful than the gunshot. "Leave and don't come back. This horse has made his choice." The leader, his face pale with a mixture of fear and rage, finally regained control of his horse. He glared at Rowan, then at Ironhowl, who now stood proudly beside the man. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," replied Rowan calmly. "It is." With a final venomous look, the leader wheeled his horse around and galloped away, the man in the red hat following close behind. Their retreat through the forest was marked by the sound of breaking branches and muttered curses. When they were gone, Rowan turned to Ironhowl. The horse was breathing hard, his coat gleaming with sweat, but his eyes, those eyes that had once been so dull and hopeless, now burned with life and determination. "You chose," said Rowan softly, placing his hand on the horse's powerful neck. "You actually chose." Ironhowl lowered his head, gently butting it against Rowan's chest, a gesture not of submission but of connection, of trust. Together, they made their way back to the cabin. The forest around them seemed different somehow, more alive, more welcoming, as if it too recognized the bond that had formed between man and horse, a bond forged in survival and strengthened by choice. Summer arrived in North Vale Wilderness with an explosion of life. The forest hummed with insects, birds nested in the tall pines, and wildflowers carpeted the clearings with vibrant colors. In the months following the confrontation, neither Rowan nor Ironhowl had seen any sign of the mining company men. Life had settled into a pleasant rhythm, one of partnership and mutual trust. On a particularly fine morning, Rowan sat on the cabin's porch, whittling a piece of pine wood. Ironhowl grazed nearby, his coat gleaming like polished onyx in the sunlight. The transformation from the skeletal, dying animal Rowan had found in winter to this magnificent creature was nothing short of miraculous. "You're something special, you know that?" Rowan called out, smiling as the horse raised his head at the sound of his voice. Ironhowl trotted over, nuzzling Rowan's shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar between them. The connection they shared went beyond words, beyond simple domestication. It was a partnership of equals, each bringing their strengths to the relationship. Yet as Rowan watched Iron Howl return to his grazing, a thought that had been growing in his mind for weeks finally crystallized. Iron Howl was strong now, healthy. He no longer needed Rowan's care to survive, and more importantly, he deserved to choose his own path. That afternoon, Rowan led Iron Howl to the edge of a large meadow they had discovered on one of their explorations. It stretched for miles, eventually connecting with wild horse country to the west, free country, where Iron Howl could run without constraints, join a herd if he wished, or forge his own solitary path. "Listen," Rowan said, his voice catching slightly as he removed the light halter he sometimes used to guide the horse. "You don't need me anymore, Iron Howl. The world is yours now." He stepped back, making a sweeping gesture toward the open meadow. "Go. Take what we built and make it yours." Iron Howl stood perfectly still, his intelligent eyes fixed on Rowan. There was a moment, a perfect, suspended moment, where everything seemed to balance on the edge of a decision. Then, with a sharp snort and a surge of muscle, Iron Howl galloped away into the meadow. Rowan watched, his heart both full and breaking, as the horse ran, truly ran, for perhaps the first time since he'd known him. His powerful legs ate up the ground, his mane and tail streaming behind him like banners of freedom. But instead of continuing toward the distant mountains, Iron Howl made a wide circle of the meadow. He ran for the pure joy of running, kicking up his heels like a colt, celebrating the strength in his body. After completing the circuit, to Rowan's amazement, he trotted back. He stopped just short of where Rowan stood, breathing hard from his exertion, but his eyes clear and focused. He lowered his head and then deliberately pushed his nose against Rowan's chest. You're staying?" Rowan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Iron Howl snorted, as if the answer should have been obvious all along. With trembling fingers, Rowan reached out to touch the horse's neck, feeling the strong pulse beneath the sleek coat. Understanding dawned slowly, but completely. Iron Howl wasn't staying out of need or dependency. He was staying out of choice. He had tasted freedom, tested his strength, and decided that his place was here. Not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. "All right then," said Rowan, a smile breaking across his face. "All right." They walked back to the cabin side by side. No halter, no rope, no compulsion. Just two beings who had chosen each other against all odds. That night, as they sat beneath the stars, Rowan leaning against a log near the cabin with Iron Howl standing nearby, the forest seemed to breathe around them with a new rhythm. Crickets chirped their evening songs, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out softly. "You know," Rowan said, looking up at the canopy of stars visible through the gap in the trees, "I came here to escape, to hide from the world after I lost everything." He rarely spoke of his past, even to himself, but tonight felt different. My wife, my daughter, gone in a single winter to fever. My farm taken by the bank when I couldn't work it alone. Iron Howl shifted slightly, his ears turning toward Rowan's voice. "I thought I wanted to disappear," Rowan continued, "to fade away until there was nothing left of me. And for years, that's exactly what I did." He chuckled softly. "Then you showed up, half dead, and somehow you brought me back to life while I was trying to do the same for you." The horse lowered his massive head, gently bumping Rowan's shoulder. The man raised his hand automatically, stroking the soft muzzle. "I gave you a choice today," Rowan said, "but you've been giving me one every day since I found you. A choice to care again, to connect, to live, not just survive." As if understanding perfectly, Iron Howl settled down on the ground next to Rowan, folding his legs beneath him in a gesture of complete trust. Together, they watched the stars wheel slowly across the sky, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to remain. A year passed since that winter day when Rowan had found Iron Howl tied to a tree, abandoned to die. The seasons had completed their cycle, and once again snow dusted the pines of North Vale Wilderness. But this winter was different. The cabin, once a place of solitary existence, now hummed with shared life. Rowan had expanded the stable, creating a larger, more comfortable space for Iron Howl and Clara. He'd constructed a proper paddock as well, giving the animals room to move even when the snow piled high. The cabin itself felt warmer somehow, as if the presence of connection had chased away the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. On this particular morning, Rowan and Iron Howl were returning from checking trap lines, not for animals, but for the attention of any unwelcome visitors. Though they'd seen no sign of the mining company men since the confrontation, Rowan maintained vigilance. The forest had taught him that preparation was never wasted. As they crested a small rise, something caught Rowan's attention. A thin column of smoke rising from a spot not far from where he had first found Ironhowl. Someone had made camp in the forest. Exchanging a glance with the horse, Rowan adjusted course. They moved cautiously through the trees, Ironhowl stepping as quietly as a creature his size could manage. When they were close enough to see the source of the smoke, Rowan paused, surprised. It wasn't the mining men. Instead, a solitary traveler sat huddled by a meager fire. A young woman, barely more than a girl, wrapped in a coat too thin for the winter cold. Beside her lay a pack and what looked like an artist's satchel. Her face was pale with cold, her lips taking on a bluish tinge that worried Rowan immediately. "Hello there," he called, stepping into view, but keeping a respectful distance. The young woman startled, scrambling to her feet. Who's there?" Her voice trembled. Whether from fear or cold, Rowan couldn't tell. "Name's Rowan, this is Ironhowl," he said, gesturing to the horse. "We live not far from here. You look like you could use a warmer fire than that." She stared at them, her gaze lingering on Ironhowl with obvious wonder. That's the most beautiful horse I've ever seen," she said, momentarily forgetting her caution. "He is that," agreed Rowan with a smile. "Your fire's dying, and you're too lightly dressed for these woods in winter. Would you like to come warm up at my cabin? Get a proper meal?" The woman hesitated, understandably wary of a stranger's invitation. I don't want to impose. I'm just passing through, making sketches for my art studies." She gestured to her satchel. "No imposition," Rowan assured her. "The forest has its own rules about hospitality. On a day like this, it's no kindness to leave someone to the cold." Perhaps it was the sincerity in his voice, or the way Ironhowl stood calmly beside him without restraint, but something convinced her. "All right, thank you. I'm Emma, by the way." As they walked back to the cabin, Emma explained that she was an art student from the city, drawn to the wilderness to capture its raw beauty. She'd underestimated the difficulty of the terrain and the bite of the cold, wandering farther than intended and finding herself unsure of the way back. "The forest can do that," Rowan said. "Pull you in deeper than you planned. Sometimes it's trying to show you something." At the cabin, Rowan built up the fire while Emma warmed her hands, looking around with undisguised curiosity. "It's amazing that you live out here all alone," she said. "Not alone," Rowan corrected gently, glancing through the window where Ironhowl could be seen in the paddock. "Not anymore." Over a simple but hearty stew, Rowan found himself telling Emma the story of how he and Ironhowl had found each other. She listened intently, occasionally making quick sketches in a small pad she pulled from her pocket. "That's incredible," she said when he finished. "The connection between you two, it's something special." "It is," Rowan agreed. "Taught me something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" Emma asked. "That sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning in disguise. Ironhowl was left to die, and I was just existing, not really living. We both got a second chance." Emma stayed for 3 days, longer than she'd intended, sketching Ironhowl from every angle and capturing the unique bond between horse and man. On the morning she was set to leave, she presented Rowan with a drawing. Ironhowl standing proud against the forest backdrop, his eyes alive with intelligence and spirit, and Rowan beside him, no longer the solitary hermit, but a man reconnected to life. "I want you to have this," she said. "As thanks." Rowan accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. "This is fine work. You have a real talent." Emma smiled. "I'm going to show these sketches at my university exhibition. If that's all right with you? People should know this story." Rowan considered for a moment, then nodded. "Stories are meant to be shared, I suppose, especially ones with hope in them." As he and Ironhowl escorted Emma to the forest's edge, where the trail would lead her back to the town beyond, Rowan reflected on the unexpected turns life could take. A year ago, he'd been a man hiding from the world, from connection, from his own heart. Now he stood beside a magnificent horse who had chosen to stay with him, watching a young artist carry their story back to the wider world. "Will you come visit again?" he asked as they prepared to part ways. "When the spring comes, perhaps. The forest is different then, worth seeing." "I'd like that very much," Emma replied. "And maybe I'll bring some proper art supplies, paint, canvases. Ironhowl deserves to be captured in color, I think." After Emma departed, Rowan and Ironhowl made their way back to the cabin. The snow was falling again, gentle flakes drifting through the pines, but the cold couldn't touch the warmth that had taken root in Rowan's heart. As they reached the clearing, Ironhowl suddenly broke away, cantering in a joyful circle around the cabin before returning to Rowan's side. His breath formed clouds in the cold air, his eyes bright with what could only be described as happiness. "I know," Rowan said, placing his hand on the horse's strong neck. "I feel it too." What had once been survival was now something greater. Two broken beings, abandoned in different ways, had found in each other not just healing but transformation. Ironhowl wasn't just saved, he was reborn, and in doing so, he saved the man who saw him when no one else did. Together they walked into the cabin as the snow continued to fall, not as owner and possession, but as companions who had chosen each other. The forest around them seemed to settle with contentment, as if acknowledging that sometimes, from the darkest moments, the most profound connections can emerge. In the wilderness of North Vale, a horse and a man had rediscovered what it meant to truly live, not through grand adventures or heroic deeds, but through the simple, profound act of seeing value in each other when the rest of the world had turned away. And that, perhaps, was the greatest rebirth of all. My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.